Hey guys, welcome to Plyometric activity day number 2. So we're going to start out with a warm-up, and my little 2-year-old daughter just kind of smudged that, but since you guys can still read it, it's kind of like a work of art for her, so I couldn't possibly fix that or change it. But we're going to start with mobilization, and we're going to hit shoulders, T-spine or thoracic spine, hips, and ankles. And so we kind of brief on each of those and just something just a little bit different, just for the sake of doing something different. And again, today is more of a demonstration day than a true plyometric day. So so warm up for a demonstrator, who is me today, is going to probably get the job done. Going to go from mobilization into activation, do some core, some triceps, some lats, some glutes, some hammies. And then I left potentiation off because potentiation, through my demonstrations, I'm going to hit a lot of basically what would be acceptable as potentiation movements. So I'm going to be a little conservative with what I'm doing today. So I think my potentiation is just going to naturally occur within all these very neurological movements that we're just going to go through today. So I'm going to go through some movements off of a small box, off of a big box. We'll break out some hurdles. I was thinking about doing rope slams, but you guys recently in one of our work capacity activity days, you guys watched me do a bunch of rope slamming, so you're probably sick of it. But I just want you to keep in mind that it doesn't always have to be 2 arms. It doesn't always have to be 2 arms just up and down. You can go 2 arms, 1 arm. You can go sort of lateral, rotational. You can do, your arms flaring around, all kinds of stuff. You can mix it up big time. You can change your grip. Instead of an overhand grip, you can do an underhand grip. And I got a couple of med ball movements for us today, some band activities, chalk/speed ladder, and jump rope. And yeah, here we go. Let's get the party started. All right, so for shoulders, again, I'm just looking for mobilization. I just want to get that joint moving with a little bit of work in there. This band's just a little short for this movement, aka my shoulders are a little immobile for using this band, but some repetitions there, just going belly to back, getting a little bit of band resistance along the way. Just a reminder on this one, some rotation of the hands over the side. Get some benefits from looking forward, some benefits from looking to the rear hand. Oof, I'm getting so much mobilization in my joints here. Ugh, it sounds pretty bad. I wonder if you guys are going to pick that up on the microphone. If so, hopefully it doesn't make you puke. It's pretty gross sounding. So shoulders, that's a lazy man's, shoulder warm-up. Also can just use a wall right here, and you'd sort of do almost like a pec stretch, where you're, hopefully that's a better angle. I'm just going flush, my forearm's flush against the wall, and I'm kind of just opening up my pec, and I'm actually going to push into the wall and get sort of a one-arm chest fly going. And as I cut over, I'm going to look the opposite direction. So I'm getting a little bit of joint mobility, but also a little bit of pec activation. So that's one of those times where we're getting a little bit of both. So I'm going to check my shoulders off the box for that T-spine. Since we do have a box here, just taking advantage of it. And we're going to go with some sort of lazy man's T-spine work. I'm pulling that front knee. Well, I guess I can just face you guys. I'm pulling that front knee across my midline. That's going to shorten the range of motion that my top hand needs to go back and around. And whenever my hand is going back behind me, my eyes are basically going to follow my thumb. And just in case you can't hear me breathing with that, a lot of times I'll do a big breath beforehand and then I'll just exhale into it. So T-spine, we can call it there. You guys have seen several T-spine mobilization movements from me. So that's just sort of a lazy man's, box T-spine. Hips. Yeah, just while we have some of this equipment out, and maybe we're feeling lazy, maybe if you take a bench in the weight room or a box or just a counter such as this, maybe like those stretching tables that they have in the athletic training room, you can do sort of a standing pigeon stretch. Nice. And then we want something else for those hips. Maybe we could skip the equipment and just do some of our lateral lunges with rotation. So my feet start together. I'm going to lunge out, rotate, and press back. Trying to keep a tall spine here. And again, we're getting a little bit of mobilization, a little bit of activation here. Nice. So hips, I'll leave it at that. Ankles, since we've got the band out. What you can do is take that band and loop it around that ankle twice. And then what you're able to do is you're able to do assisted as well as resisted articulations on that ankle. And so I can get a little bit bigger range of motion with the band if I'm using it to allow for assistance. And then if I also wanted to do some resisted movements, some eversion, pronation, supination, that we're so strong at our plantar flexion, that's not really beneficial, but we can get a little bit of a dorsiflexion calf stretch. And so we might push away, we might plantar flex to push away, and then allow for it to come back in and get a little bit further than we normally do. So proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation stretching, PNF, is a stretching pattern of working a range of motion, stretching the agonist muscle, flexing the agonist muscle, relaxing and repeating. So you contract, relax, antagonist. So if I'm stretching my quad, I'm going to Quad's a bad demo. We're already on the calf. Let's just stick with the calf. So what I might do is allow that toe to come back at me as far as possible, or as far as comfortable, and I hold for a few seconds, and then I'm going to lightly activate my calf for a few seconds. And then not only am I going to relax, but I'm actually going to contract my anterior tibialis, which is going to try to pull my toe to my shin even further. So now I'm relaxing and I'm contracting my antagonist. So my agonist is my calf. It's the primary function of this stretch. My antagonist is that anterior tibialis, which is going to help pull my toes to my shin. And I'm going to do that for a few seconds, and then I relax, and then I'm going to pull it away for a few seconds. My calf has a little bit of activation here, and then I'm going to relax, and I'm going to squeeze that anterior tibialis pretty tight again. So that's PNF stretching, or proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation. So not necessarily the greatest mobility stretching strategy. Would be great to do afterwards. It just kind of comes with too much of that static stretch effect where our muscles being over lengthened before explosive or dynamic activities. So and let's say I do maybe those rotations and those articulations, and maybe some supinations and pronations on both ankles. So then my ankles are good. And then what would I do for activation? So we're always kind of harping on that core. So let's keep that up a little bit. And since I've got the boxes out, I'll just kind of riff with it a little bit. And if you're watching people do planks, elevated planks on a bench typically, it may look easier, and the physics of it says that it should be easier, because instead of your body being horizontal and all that weight on your arms, as you elevate the arms up onto a bench, the physics of it suggests that it will be easier. But if you're doing an active plank and you're pulling your elbows back towards you, what I found is that change in angle actually provides for a greater amount of tension in the abdomen. So I get it's a better ab exercise when you elevate it. So it's kind of funny, is it looks and it should be easier, but because of the muscular activation that comes with it, it's tough. And it helps a lot of people who may struggle with activating that musculature on a flat normal plank. When you elevate them, you get a lot of light bulbs going over the head. They're like, oh, okay, that's what you were talking about. So I'll do a 20-second plank. And what I've also moved away from is calling them planks. A lot of times I will label a plank, or I'll just label it a hard plank. And the hard plank isn't really anything different, aside from it's just reminding people that the plank should be hard and they should be active. So you should have tight glutes, tight abdomen, and those elbows pulling back towards them to get those lats fired up. And again, I'll do about 20 seconds right here. And what I'm kind of doing on this box is I'm almost trying to get to kind of pop a wheelie or tilt up to me. So I don't want anybody to get hurt doing it, but if you're at home right now, you could go over to maybe an arm on the couch, or the seat of a lazy boy or something. But all I'm doing is tight glutes, tight gut, and my elbows are getting dragged back as I'm trying to pop a wheelie on this couple of boxes. And that instantly gives me some better glute activation. Core activation. And then triceps. Now triceps are going to be not the most important thing for a plyometric activity, but on a day, maybe your plyometrics are just prior to a lift. I just I like to sprinkle in the triceps just quite a bit. Just very few people overwork triceps or have too strong of triceps. So as long as we have our bench out, our box, we can just do some close grip push-ups. Not to exhaustion, just the activation. Nice. And for our lats, I do like to warm up the lats a little bit on a plyo day because there's going to be so much shoulder flexion with a lot of jumping that for me, yeah, I'm into it. I think the lats are going to be involved in quite a bit of your jumping. And actually there's some decent arguments for why the fascial lines that come from the lat on one side, they're going to cross over at your lumbopelvic complex onto the other side and tie into your glute. And basically it means that if you have a strong lat, you're going to have better ankle stability. So I think there's a good argument for that. So that's why I would consider activating lats on a day such as today. So let's go with some med ball pullovers. Right here, hit that lat stretch and kind of rip it back up. And consider doing a set of about 20 or so. Not that that's what I did. Again, this is for demos to try and get you guys the idea without just totally making you watch me do a whole batch of everything. Lats are good. Let's get the glutes. I'm going to resume that position there and just get into some hip thrusts. Again, if you've not done any hip thrusting, you may want to look into the work of Dr. Brett Contreras, who for the last decade has kind of been the self-anointed glute guy. And a lot of his research and his writing and speaking is about hinge patterns and the importance of the glute complex of muscles. Now here, very similar to, it's just a glute bridge with my shoulders elevated more or less. And there's a few different, you can adjust sort of your foot position, narrow, wide, whatever. Your knee position, you could put a band around the knees, you can put weight on the hips. And that's all for different styles. And then for technique, there's some good arguments for a non-neutral neck where you're constantly tense and looking forward. So there's some arguments for that position in the neck, and also just a constant neutral position at the neck. And I don't have a strong preference for either, but I do prefer that constant neutral neck, just because that's such a common area of focus and a common issue. And hamstrings. So honestly, just the easiest one that comes to mind is an inchworm. So we're gonna hand walk out as far as we can without falling on our face, and then we're gonna ankle walk up. And as I'm ankle walking up here, that tension right there is giving me a little bit of stretch, and then as I stand up, I'm getting some of that resistance. I'm getting a little bit of hamstring activation. So not the strongest hamstring activator, but I would say a few inchworms, and then maybe some in-place butt kicks might give you a little bit of hamstring activation. There's a million other movements we could do. We could bring that med ball out and do some hamstring curls on the med ball. I could do glute bridges with long legs on the ground. Yeah, another good one would be just to bring our band back out. And to do some banded RDLs right there. Yeah, so that's probably the best one out of all the ones I just listed. One of my favorites, especially because it's not only working musculature, but it's also working on that pattern. Because if we're doing plyometrics and we're jumping around, that's a good idea. All right. let's see, this camera angle's okay. I'm going to change it in a second here, but really, I really wanted to start with some of our hurdles and our speed ladder. So bear with me. Probably not my best day as a cameraman. But first of all, let's talk about speed ladders. Speed ladders are kind of silly, I would have to say. I think they're silly, not because they're bad, but I think that they're silly because people think that by doing speed ladders and a lot of the little like dance movements, they think that that's going to translate into athletics. And basically, I would have to say that if you're maybe a tango dancer or a bullfighter, that might be your chance at having a speed ladder translate. But if you're looking at all these little kind of icky shuffle movements where we're going forwards and backwards, and people start like over speeding on their handwork, and they're doing all that, and they're doing basically hopscotch and all that. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's not very athletic. It doesn't translate. If you're running down the field as a wide receiver and looking over your shoulder for a ball, you're not doing anything similar to that. So what is it good for? I think it's good for warming up. You do challenge some coordination. You get people to start paying attention to how they're moving. It's kind of fun because some people bring in like a wacky variation, and you kind of maybe just let them choose what they're going to do. So it's a good warm-up. If you keep at it, it becomes conditioning. I'm breathing just a little bit harder than normal. Maybe some ankle stability could be argued because of those little cutting steps and things like that. But is it building speed? No, not really. What a speed ladder used to be, or originally, from my understanding, was that the speed ladder, the length between the rails, or whatever you'd call them, the steps on the ladder, would start small, and then as they went along, they would get bigger and bigger and bigger. And the goal was to use that to train athletes out of the beginning of a sprint, that they're going to take smaller steps, and as they accelerate, they're going to take bigger steps. So my understanding is that that's what a speed ladder originally was, and then now, for whatever reason, they all have uniform squares, and they're more of like a gimmicky kind of warm-up thing, and they're not bad. It's not, anytime you're getting somebody's heart rate up and you're getting them outside and moving around, I'm all for it. But if you think that this is going to make you run in a straight line faster, or start performing better in a typical sport, I would have to argue that it's probably not. So I would encourage anybody who's thinking about spending a lot of time on a speed ladder to run sprints or run hills, or basically do pretty much anything besides that speed ladder. Unless you just think the speed ladder is fun and you want to use it for a warm-up, or you just want to do a little bit of getting your heart rate up on it. So that's kind of my 2 cents on the speed ladder. And also, I would encourage you guys, if you're thinking about buying a speed ladder, maybe just buy a piece of chalk instead. Because that piece of chalk, you can make hopscotch, you can make a speed ladder, and it carries well and it costs less. So not that this is a big investment, but a piece of chalk on the sidewalk gets you basically the same thing. So just something to keep in mind is that you can do that, or you can put some tape down. But yeah, just some thoughts on the speed ladder. And one thing I did not mention on the speed ladder was it can also be good to do like a bear crawl variation and walk your hands through, and that gets you some core stability and some shoulder stability as well. And it's also going to get you sweating. So I want to do that. I'll do a little bit of hurdle work while we've got this camera angle going. So on my hurdle here, I've got some taller hurdles there, but what we start running into with a bigger implement is a smaller implement. What I'm going to watch a lot of times when I'm watching athletes jump is I'm watching right here what's going on with their hips. Are their hips actually coming through, or are they just finding that hip flexor and sneaking over? So that's what you'll see a lot of times on big box jumps, is that athletes' hips are coming through okay, but they're just really aggressive on tucking their knees up to their chest. And as coaches, as exercise scientists, what we really want to see a little bit more is that hip action, because that's the hardest. That's basically the hardest of the three joints in triple extension to train, and it's also the most productive, in my opinion. So with the ladders, we get all the options in the world. We can go lateral jumps, we can do our front to backs, we can do continuous. Be thinking about how we played out some of our progressions on our last video, whether it was no counter movement, double contact, and continuous. You can do all those same things with the hurdles, and now it just helps you sort of format that as you please. So you can go, that was so on my hip action. I had counter movement. I can go no counter movement. You can pause here. Oof. I give myself a narrow landing space, but my hips came through on that. I'm pretty confident. You can go double contact. So you can play around with it and get creative, and you can do all sorts of progressions. These are pretty cheap, pretty lightweight, give you options, help keep your athletes honest. But again, are they the most direct tool? You could probably do quite a bit of the work without them, but they're just a tool, and they're good, and they help sort of streamline what your goal is. So you can go through and then stick at the end. You can alter your landings and your endings. Instead of sticking at the end, I could do a sprint. So just options. Yeah, I don't know if I have a whole lot of substitute items for hurdles, because I don't want you guys getting caught up on something and like snapping an ankle. But just again, if you've got a piece of chalk, you just draw some lines and you can have them do really similar movements. You know, those hurdles they keep me honest. I kind of knocked one a little bit, and you know, some of my landings are so narrow that it shows that I'm not being super athletic, because I'm jumping up and then I'm barely making my landing. So it keeps you honest. So an okay product to consider and maybe to experiment with a little bit. Green hurdles. All right, we'll do some more. We'll do box work. All right, we're moving along pretty well here. Let's change this camera angle. All right. All right, that's better, isn't it? Nice. So with plyos and boxes, again, think about where you start with maybe a true beginner. Is you would have them You work on that squat pattern and just teaching them simply how to move that body and double check. Now, remember, on a loaded squat, depending on what your standards are and depending on what your goals are, on a loaded squat, a lot of times we're looking for that hip joint below the knee. And that's one of the reasons that is A, it gives us a standard, and B, is that it helps us access our posterior chain. If we're just squatting up here, we're kind of living on that anterior chain a little bit more, which is okay, but if you're doing a lot of complex athletic movements, you want that posterior chain activated and in the game as well. So something to keep in mind. Kind of depends on what you want, but that's a standard that I tend to stick to. But when I'm doing plyometrics, right before I jump, I'm not looking for a parallel or below parallel squat. That's asking a little bit much. So, and it's also just it's not going to have as much carryover into the sporting world, because if your athletes are doing that, then the opponent is usually going to be faster than them and just more successful. So probably kind of a goofy thing to do. But anyways, so if we're starting with our squatting pattern, remember that's sort of our base position. And then we could go into drop squats. Go into drop squats, and some of the biggest things I'd watch out for there are those hips staying high, or are they being athletic and centered? Is that chest caving inward? And then from the front, are those knees going valgus? Are they going inward? Hopefully not, because if in the weight room or out in the field in a slow controlled setting where there's basically no variables, if your knees are zipping inward, if they're doing that in that easy controlled setting, what are they doing on a basketball court, on a volleyball court, in the middle of a cheerleading routine? They're probably doing that at an even more accelerated rate with more force going through it, and that's a great time to have knee problems, cause some knee surgery. So that's kind of that's basically how an ACL tears, from what I understand. So watching that, and if you say keep those knees wide, a lot of times what you'll see is that athletes will move their feet out wider. That's not what we're looking for. We just want our knees to either be neutral, or they're better off going wide than they are going inside, right? That rhymes. That might be a good saying to utilize. All right, so we've taught our squat pattern. We worked on some drop squats. And then what are we going to do? What's next? How about a jump to box? So I'm looking to get my whole foot on top of the box, not heel off, not toe off. And once I'm on top of that box, I'm just going to hit that squat load movement again. The reason that going up on a box would be your next progression, it's arguable that it could be the next progression before even a true jump, like a half jump, just like that. Because if I jump the same amount of height, and I jump forward a little bit and I land on a box, it's removing the deceleration and the extra impact from gravity, even though we're just talking about a few inches. So it's arguable which is the next progression, and it's kind of based on your philosophy and some of the so many factors that are involved. But after just a jump up to box, maybe we bring it back down and we're doing just traditional jumps into our landing. So you've got no counter movement. You can pause the bottom, jump and land. You've got counter movement, no hands. And you've got full counter movement. I did a bad landing there. I'm going to typically try to get my hands down, so I'm going to do that one again. Full counter movement with hands. There we go, that one's a little bit better. And you can do double contacts. Counter movement, double contact. and continuous. Nice. I know I forgot one. After our squat pattern and our depth drop, or drop squat, excuse me, after the drop squat, your next movement may very likely be a depth drop. That depth drop would just be a simple step off into our landing position. Kind of silly, but there's good logic for it. The logic is you don't want to drive a Ferrari with no brakes. Too many athletes are dominant and proficient at accelerating and producing speed, but their mechanics for deceleration are sloppy. So while jumping is important in many sports, sometimes you need to be good at jumping and running, or just running. So when we get better at decelerating, whether it's the drop squat or the depth drop, and that helps build a foundation for all of our other explosive movements and plyometric work, that solid foundation of being able to land and decelerate, because it's really similar biomechanics for landing off of stepping off a box as it is for sprinting and then needing to decelerate and go in the opposite direction. So these don't seem like they have much to do with athletic performance, but it's foundational work. If you give me some of the best athletes in the world, and several years ago I would have rolled my eyes at the thought of doing something like this, but over time I've seen that this is just this is like the basics. This is like taking an NBA player and having them practice free throws. It's something that they're going to be doing. You might as well just make sure they're sharp, even though they're probably better at it shooting free throws than, I don't know, 99% of the normal population. Great athletes are probably better at landing and doing simple things like this than 99% of the population. But keep in mind, it's also something that they're going to do over and over and over again. So you might as well just double check that they're doing things really well and help ingrain in them that proper movement pattern. Sorry, I'm checking my cheat sheet right here. We also have not talked about how you could progress into a lot of one-footed movements like this. So I'm not talking much about one-footed movements today, because I feel like in the last two videos we sort of scratched that itch. We talked quite a bit about one-footed, so I'm not going to go into it too much. All right. Once that box gets bigger, some good things can happen, such as a higher intensity and intent in our preload. And as we come through our triple extension, it might be more strenuous and more intense than it has been before. And especially as we start competing or having a little bit of fun with it, and maybe that box gets higher and you start stacking on plates and start to get that a little higher and things like that. So those are some good things that come with it. But what's bad? You get bloody shins, people are falling off and then reaching out and breaking like wrists and fingers, catching themselves on the ground. On a normal plyo box, I've seen people, let's say the box is kind of like up here. I've seen people get so nervous for making that jump that they come forward and they just smash their finger into the box as they're getting ready to jump. I don't know that I've ever seen anybody break a finger, but I've definitely seen some bloody fingers. And I know I see somebody jump on top of a box and have great hip extension. So hopefully, I don't think I pulled my knees up very much at all there. So hopefully that means that my hips extended fairly well. But a lot of times what I'll see on something like this is I'll see somebody pop on top of it and then they come up and puff their chest out like they just did something great. Okay, so you have the flexibility to do that with your leg, and you did it with both legs at the same time. Not very impressive. I'm not advocating big, high competition jumps because I think the risk versus reward is very arguable. But I like what Coach Louis Simmons said from Westside Barbell. He said that box jumps will help drive competition, and because of that, it will decrease inhibition. So people are, you start putting maybe not necessarily maybe money on the line or just some pride and egos, and you start being a little silly and risking broken fingers and wrists and all this other stuff. As you're starting to take some of those other risks, as it starts getting higher, people will start jumping harder and higher than they ever had before, even though it might include, two big knee tucks up to their chest. Because when they're starting to jump on a platform this high, that is kind of impressive, and it's decreasing the inhibition because they want to get up there so bad, and they're getting nervous, and adrenaline's going a little bit, and they know, when it starts to get pretty high, they know if I don't make this, it's gonna hurt, so I want to get up there really, really bad. So, just a couple of thoughts on the bigger box jumps. Some other options would be kind of playing around with some single leg activity. Again, is the risk versus reward there? That's arguable. Now when I'm sticking that landing, it's fairly athletic based, and what I could do now, all I had to do there was like clip my foot on the side of it, and then I'm making like a blooper reel all of a sudden. So luckily that hasn't happened yet. But is that worth it? Is that worth the risk? Maybe not, because I could just as easily take that top box off and use a shoulder box. I could jump just as high or do a smaller jump and stick that same landing and progress from there. So it depends are you progressing the jump? In which case a big jump to a high box is a low impact. Are you progressing the landing? A big jump to a small box is a higher impact landing, right? That's sort of like a lateral jop. We're jumping off 2 feet and landing on 1. We talked about jops quite a bit in our last video, although I don't think I didn't go into anything with boxes or elevating height. We did talk about rotation a little bit, so a lot of those same principles apply. So that's why we're just about done. Another nice thing about the bigger boxes, you can kick up your so hopefully that was a decent rep, but you can kick up your depth drops as well. And again, I told that story about Olympic weightlifter Derek Crass, who was telling me a story about it being in the 80s and then somebody mistranslating a Russian text on their training. And I think the story goes that instead of 3 meters for depth drops, it was 3 feet. So I think that's how the story goes, but essentially they had lifters stepping off of a height of almost a basketball hoop, which is 10 foot, and they were stepping off of a little bit over 9 feet into a drop squat, or into a depth drop, excuse me. So it's going to be like the Goldilocks principle. At some point, more is not always more. You're going to find a sweet spot on that. All right, I'm going to leave the box alone there. Oh, here's the last thing. Again, with those inhibitions and kind of being bold and doing, safety first kind of thing, do we want to jump over boxes? you know, I can just as easily step off to the side and work on a jump off to the side of a box. Now I've had much less risk. I didn't almost clip my feet over on the way up, and I almost didn't clip it on the way down. So I can do the same thing without all that risk, but when you add it in, people start getting competitive. It becomes a little bit more fun, but it's a risk versus reward. So you gotta know your population, and keep in mind that you can get a little bit more risky when you have, instead of having like metal plyo boxes or wooden plyo boxes, some organizations make sort of big, soft, fluffy items that are perfect, and if you kind of wipe out on it, you'd probably laugh more than anything. So just kind of know your population, that risk versus reward. You know, with younger athletes, I might have them do sort of jumping games and competitions, and then as athletes get older, I have them jump, you know, maybe really old, just having them jump in place, they might kind of look at you and say, you know, I couldn't tell you the last time I jumped at all. So any kind of jumping, they wouldn't even have to leave the ground. You could even just do some quick squats, and you're still getting that plyometric effect, right? You're still getting that muscle spindle stretch as the force goes into the eccentric loading. Maybe that muscle spindle is fired. That signal goes up your afferent nerves, gets a signal going in your spinal cord, which sends an efferent signal back down to the quad and tells that puppy to fire. So we don't even have to leave the ground to do some of these things. You know, we did kettlebell swings. We've done kettlebell swings in that same movement pattern, and you're not leaving the ground, but you're getting a lot of similar benefits. And remember, I put in one of our last slides in our previous lecture, that kettlebell swing. They took a 53-pound kettlebell swing, and they figured out that some of the force that the kettlebell was exerting or exhibiting in a swing was 500 pounds. So there's some good rationale for just using kettlebell swings. And are kettlebell swings safer than jumping over a box and potentially wiping out? Yes, but I'm going to let you guys kind of use your know-how from your science and your art and figure out what's going to be best for your population. So last thing I'm going to use just real quick be a band. So taking a band like this. Now, when I'm pretty much relaxed, that band is back here. That's in a stretch position for me. So if I press back out and I relax back there, I think I'm going to get some plyometric effect from that. Make sense? I think so. So it's just taking a band and doing something along those lines. You can do presses. If you're strong enough for it, you can get in this position and then get down and do some push-ups on the ground. And the same thing, so not everything is for lower body and jumping. Our upper body needs it too, especially if we're in a throwing sport, or think about volleyball, how explosive the upper body is. So we need to be explosive from head to toe. So jumping is great and practical, but some of this work in other forms and fashions will help us out as well. So same idea. Maybe grab that band to where the back is getting a little bit of stretch. And you can do some plyometric rows as well. And the list goes on. You can do triceps, overhead press, all kinds of things. And that's going to translate to athletics, but it's also going to improve some of your lifts as well, and making you more powerful in a certain range of motion and certain muscles more powerful is also going to help that same range of motion or movement pattern become stronger. They work hand in hand often. So I lied. That's not our last piece of equipment. That was sort of a fib, I guess. All right. Less than 5 minutes, I'm predicting. All right. I think that's the third time I've said something like that. if you're going to do med ball work, know your med ball. Some med balls are good for slamming, others are not. Others are really great at slamming, so good that they pop up and they break people's noses and chip teeth and split lips. So my first day as a personal trainer, somebody told me never to toss a medicine ball to somebody. Always hand it to them the first time, because they'd seen multiple personal trainers throw a medicine ball over to a client, and the personal trainer just makes it look so easy, and the client, lazily sticks out their hands like they're going to catch a basketball, and the ball zips through their hands and breaks their nose or splits their lip or whatever. So make sure someone feels the medicine ball before you start playing catch or do anything dynamic like that. And on your partners, you can throw it to each other and do lateral throws. You can do scoop tosses, back up over the head. You can do jumping, a big old, almost like a broad jump chest pass. So you can do these great movements that are from head to toe explosive. But if you're just by yourself, a couple ones that we can go through real quick would be like a bent over med ball chest pass. If you've got a brick wall nearby or solid wall, you can stay standing and just go do it up against the wall. So this one's okay for slamming, but what's going to happen is with a ball like that, if you do a lot of slamming with it, and I'm talking about like an overhead, like you're trying to put a hole in the ground, a slam like that is eventually going to wear this ball out, and it's going to start to just crack. So kind of know your medicine ball. Yes, you technically can slam that, but that's not the greatest. So something like this that has more surface area, it's a bigger item. It's also softer, so it's going to be more flexible. And you can just slam that. I'm going to get a plyometric effect from coming up here. Right? That's going to stretch my anterior chain. And then anything along those lines. And if you implement a wall or partner throws, you can get really creative. You can do a jump out into a pitch, and you can, it's just basically endless. A lot of our rugby athletes will imitate and mimic a throw pattern such as that. Let's see. One thing that I've only come across in the last couple of years that I'm beginning to like quite a bit is med ball work with a no release throw. So let's say I've got a partner over there and I want to throw a ball to him. That's great, but if I don't have a partner, if I just want to do something different, that's going to give me a lot more core stability. I can come out here and rip and just pause right there, and I can bring it back. So it's almost the opposite of plyometric, because you're getting all that eccentric force, and then instead of using like Newton's law, an opposite and equal reaction, or every action has an opposite and equal reaction, and instead of utilizing that one of Newton's laws, you're actually going to fight it, and you're going to freeze. And that momentum of the ball, that inertia that it has going downward to stop it and freeze it, gets tough. And especially when you start doing, more balancing specific items. We can come outside the hip, outside the shoulder. Oh, and I wobbled a little bit there, so let's try again, see if I can do better. That's still a little wobble. So that's taking that same plyometric effect, but instead of using it for the neurological benefit, we're going to get a little bit of more musculature, more skeletal muscle activation, and it's going to boost some joint stability and balance as well. So taking all the principles that we've learned for plyometrics and why they work great, that flies right in the face of them and utilizes all of them Basically uses all of them against themselves to do the opposite. Hopefully you guys know what I'm saying there. But a lot less neural activation, a lot more stability and muscle activation. And then, all right, so I'm going to end on this note. That jump rope is going to be similar to the speed ladder. Jump rope is great if you're using it correctly. Quick reps, a lot of speed, maybe double unders. A big jump into a double under, kind of like the higher jumps on the plyo box, is you might get a little extra, pep in your step because you don't want to get whacked in the shin by that rope. So that's something to think about, is that jump rope is great for conditioning, great for maybe some development of musculature in the feet and lower legs. But if you're looking to build speed, remember our phosphagen system lasts for up to about 20 seconds. If you're jump roping for 15 minutes, you fried your phosphagen system a long time ago, and you're either working in that glycolytic energy system or most likely oxidative. So just remember why you're doing what you're doing. Even though I heard Mike Tyson used to jump rope for 45 minutes straight, like without missing a single rep, which is just on top of him being a great fighter, just super scary to even think about. So these are all things that we can use to grow our nervous system and to make us more explosive. And that's the end of Plyometrics Day 2. Good work, everybody.